Well, welcome, everyone. This is a real pleasure for Senior College to collaborate with the library. So Brenda Harrington and I'm Mayo Bullock, currently president of Senior College, are working together. She's our tech crew over there, so she's staying in the background. If you don't know much about Senior College, we do have an information sheet on the back table. We remain strong without the Hutchinson Center and are pretty much having classes all over town, including at the library, and seem to be growing. So we're very pleased. You can be looking for our winter courses to be announced probably mid-December, but we already feel really secure about a good lineup. So at any rate, we're here tonight and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Micaela. I did not do well in languages, but that's a beautiful name. Schweitzer-Bluhm, who's currently the executive director of the nonprofit Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, and that publishes the Maine Monitor, which I think many of you get and which I just subscribe to. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to let her tell you more about herself. I know that she had 26 years in the Foreign Service, so she's got to have some good stories. So at any rate, thank you very much, and please come forward.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to do this in Belfast, because this is my hometown. So I always am happy to have a reason to do an event really close to home. I'm going to talk for probably about 20 minutes or so, and then I really hope that we'll have a robust discussion. I really want to get questions. I want your ideas, and to really have a dialogue about local news, why it's important, what we can be doing to try and save it, what you think local news should be about. So I really want to have that dialogue. I will just start off by saying a little bit more about myself. I came to this position at the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, as Mayo said, from a background as a U.S. Foreign Service officer. I represented the United States around the world for 26 years. My job was to promote democracy. That was my job, was to talk about all the principles of democracy, promote democracy, and to try and explain U.S. democracy. A big part of my job was working on the media and trying to defend the idea of a free press, trying to build up the institutions of a free press in other countries. So when I was transitioning out of the Foreign Service and looking for my next job, what I really wanted to be doing was what I had spent my career doing, defending democracy, upholding the principles of democracy, but I wanted to do it here at home. And when I saw this opportunity pop up with the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, I thought, that's perfect. Like, I want to be able to work on something that I really feel passionate about, but at home. And so I've been doing that now for about the last almost 2.5 years. It's gone by really quickly. And it's been a real treat and a real pleasure to do it. I work with an amazing group of journalists, an incredible board of directors, and in an industry that is really at a transition point. It's an exciting time to be involved in journalism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of that, and then we'll have a good conversation. So as I said, my name is Micaela, but everybody calls me Mika, so please feel free to call me Mika. As Mayo said, I'm the executive director for the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. We publish the Maine Monitor. We are a nonprofit, wholly nonprofit news organization, and we're the only news organization in Maine solely dedicated to investigative and in-depth reporting at a statewide level. We share our reporting for free with all of our readers and for free republication by all Maine regional and national news organizations. And I've brought some information in the back if you want to learn more. So tonight, as you know, I want to talk about something that is really near and dear to me, the importance of sustaining and rebuilding independent and nonpartisan local news, the challenges facing local news organizations, and what solutions are being tried to secure this vital public service for all of us. Let me start with some background. Each year in the United States, more communities are finding themselves with no functioning news outlet, no local community newsroom of journalists eager to ferret out information, keep people and institutions accountable, or empower citizens with knowledge. In its latest report, Northwestern University's Medill Local News Initiative cautioned that the number of local news outlets continued to contract at a steep rate in 2023, even steeper than in past years. According to the report, if the US remains on that trajectory, by the end of this year, nationally, we will have lost a third of our newspapers since just 2005. Maine is not immune to this trend. 6 in 10 Maine newspaper publishing jobs were cut between 2000 and 2018. And newspapers across the state have closed. The Maine Times shut down in 2004. The Journal Tribune closed in 2019 after 135 years of publishing. And most recently, right here in Belfast, the Republican Journal published its last issue after almost 200 years, when it closed along with the Courier Gazette, the Camden Herald, and the Free Press, to be collectively replaced by the new Midcoast Villager. The Midcoast Villager is committed to covering news across Waldo and Knox counties. But the fact that Waldo County now has no dedicated news outlet does mean that it joins Somerset County as Maine's second news desert. I'm rooting for the Midcoast Villager, and I'm eager to see it succeed. I look forward to working with them and finding ways for the Maine Monitor and the Villager to collaborate. At the same time, we can and should acknowledge that we have lost something when we go from 4 newspapers serving 80,000 people to 1 newspaper serving 80,000 people. I can at the same time champion a new initiative to not just sustain news, but to see local news flourish and mourn the closure of a 200-year-old institution. Without local journalism to bring issues to light, research has shown that citizens are less engaged, voter participation declines, and corruption increases. This makes sense. If you don't have information, you're not going to participate in civic events of your community. You may not know about an election or what is on the ballot, so why vote? And if no one is voting and holding leaders accountable, corruption is a lot easier. Journalism has long been recognized as an integral part of a functioning democracy, the fourth estate. Democracy only works if its citizens participate, and to participate, citizens need information, independently and impartially given. As I said, I spent 26 years as a US diplomat, representing the US in 7 countries. In my diplomatic career before joining the Maine Monitor, I saw firsthand how corrupt politicians and dictators deliberately targeted news outlets to stop independent reporting. To maintain their hold on power, they needed to keep their citizens in the dark. Democracy dies in darkness, the motto of the Washington Post, is most definitely true. Journalists are meant to be the eyes and ears of a community. The reporting can give a voice to people who might otherwise not be heard. Journalists will spend hours, days, weeks digging out information the public might not otherwise find on its own. Let me give you a couple examples. In the past year, as a result of reporting by the Maine Monitor, lawmakers passed a bill changing state mineral mining laws. The state mandated stricter prison practices to safeguard the rights of incarcerated individuals. State lawmakers called for better oversight of the guardianship system and for reforms to the probate courts that had long been overlooked. Regulators advocated for improved oversight of assisted living facilities, and law enforcement agencies said that they would review weapons disposal practices, all after the Maine Monitor raised these issues in our reports. To get the stories that revealed these community needs, our reporters do hard work, talking with dozens of people, combing through reams of documents, doing days of analysis. As an example of the commitment that goes into investigative reporting, let me give you a little bit of detail. We spent a year reporting and writing about Maine's probate courts. This included sending a survey to all the probate courts in the state, observing probate court proceedings, requesting public records and analyzing hundreds of data sets, reviewing hundreds of pages of probate court records and dozens of attorney discipline decisions, and interviewing dozens of people, including judges, registrars of probate, guardians, adults under guardianship, lawyers, advocates, family members, legislators, and judicial officials. We spent 18 months investigating Maine's assisted living facilities in collaboration with ProPublica. We submitted more than a dozen records requests, sifted through over 300 inspection documents, which we compiled into a database and parsed into 700 individual violations. We conducted a data analysis to find out which type of violations were most common and which facilities showed up most frequently. And we interviewed over 100 experts, family members, advocates, healthcare providers, and former employees. This is some examples of the kind of work that goes into journalism, not the work that an average citizen is going to have the time or the expertise or the bandwidth to do. Our journalism is grounded in careful, nonpartisan reporting, factual analysis, interviews with real people, and civil, respectful coverage. We were founded with a specific mission to deliver investigative and in-depth journalism for Maine and to give it away for free so everyone in Maine would have equitable access to the news. Our founders, veteran journalists Naomi Shalit and John Christie, in 2009, were particularly concerned about what they saw as a decline in investigative news in Maine. As Maine newsrooms cut staff, investigative projects became too time-consuming and too costly to pursue. Back to the enumeration of what goes into an investigation that I just gave you. Naomi and John felt Maine could not afford to lose this vital journalism. So they established our organization to bring back investigative reporting, to ask hard questions and dig deep. They felt we needed to keep institutions and people accountable. In choosing to create a nonprofit news organization, John and Naomi were part of a new initiative to save local news in the United States. Of course, nonprofit news was not new. Public broadcasting and our own Maine Public had been around since the 1960s, and the Town Line, South China's weekly, converted to a nonprofit model as early as 1999. But in the late 2000s, more and more people saw a need to pursue a model that separated news from its reliance on sales and advertising as a way to save local journalism. According to the Pew Research Center, 172 digital nonprofit news outlets launched just between 1987 and 2012, with the majority of them, 71%, launching in just the 4 years between 2008 and 2012, when our organization was founded. So we're right there, right smack in the middle. Since 2009, we've been joined by additional nonprofit news organizations in Maine. Jambo Africa launched in 2018. The Harpswell Anchor restarted as a nonprofit in 2021. In 2022, the Daily Bulldog, which serves Franklin County, shifted to a nonprofit structure in partnership with Mount Blue TV. In 2023, the South Berwick Reporter and the Sanford Springvale News launched, while just this past January, the Peaks Island News started publishing. All are pursuing a nonprofit news model. Nonprofit news is not just about changing the business model, but is also about changing the public perception and engagement with news organizations. As trust in news has eroded, nonprofit news leaders want to remind Americans that news reporting is a public benefit. By separating the profit interests from the news, The idea is to encourage trust in the independence and honesty of the reporting. Let's talk about trust in news for a little bit. Nationally, trust in news remains at an abysmal 32%, according to the 2024 Reuters Institute Digital News Report. Importantly, though, people trust their local news twice as much, 62%. What this tells us is that people want more local news, and that we must sustain and regrow local news if we want to rebuild that trust in news. According to that Medill report that I mentioned earlier, most communities that lose a newspaper do not get a replacement. The report notes that those communities also typically are poorer and have less access to other forms of communication like broadband. Sound familiar? If only a portion of the citizens can access news in a community, we are doing our communities and our democracy a disservice. At the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting and the Maine Monitor, we believe that a functioning news outlet is part of the glue that keeps a community together and that offers a common hearth and a common set of facts that allow people to participate in our society and our democracy. But to sustain that common hearth, we have to look at the fact that the old business model for news that sustained multiple daily newspapers in towns across Maine and across the United States is just no longer viable. A 2022 Gallup Night survey found that only 26% of respondents said that they had ever paid a news organization directly for news, 26, whether through subscriptions, membership, or charitable donations. And only 17 of those respondents said they would ever pay to access news in the future. The majority of those surveyed believed that news should be sustained by ad revenue, reflecting an outdated understanding of the revenue base for news. So let's go back to that. The majority said ads should sustain newspaper, not individuals. But let's talk about that. The decline in newspaper advertising is something that you've probably heard about. Let me give you some stark numbers, though. Advertising revenue for news in the US has declined by roughly 80% since its peak in 2006, according to the Pew Research Center. While the dollar amount for revenue from circulation has remained largely flat since 2003, not keeping pace with inflation. Additionally, print circulation can be a net drain on a newspaper's revenue, given the cost of printing and distribution. This is reflected in the decrease in print editions here in Maine, where our dailies only print 5 days a week. At the Maine Monitor, our nonprofit business model depends entirely on philanthropic support from individuals and foundations. Maine-based New England and national foundation grants fund over 62% of our budget, and individual donations provide just over 34%. Currently, about 13% of our 10,600 newsletter readers donate. In 2023, so last year, 60% of our donors were small donors, so $100 or less. We have supporters in every county in Maine. These are people who value our local in-depth reporting and want to show their support however they can. We're also very fortunate to have donors who support us at a much higher level, who support local news as a critical element of our democracy. Not only do we return the faith of our donors by holding ourselves to a really high standard for excellent journalism, but we also hold our operation and organization accountable to our supporters. We make all of our financials available on our website. We publish all of our operating policies, and we provide all the details on our funders annually. We give all the details of our staff, as well as our board of directors, made up entirely of Maine-based individuals who are responsible for our fiscal and strategic oversight. This level of transparency and accountability is very important to us, and it goes back to what I mentioned about trying to rebuild that trust in local news. Giving people that transparency and access to who we are, what we're about, and how we operate is part of giving them a sense that our news can be trusted. But our wholly nonprofit model is not the only model being tried to sustain and rebuild local news in Maine. Last year, the National Trust for Local News purchased 20 newspapers from Masthead Media, including the Portland Press-Herald, the Sun Journal, and the Morning Sentinel, securing this group of newspapers for Maine. The resulting Maine Trust for Local News operates as what's called an L3C, or a low-profit liability company. The Maine newspapers continue to operate as businesses with philanthropic donations via the National Trust, supplementing existing sources of revenue, such as advertising, circulation, and commercial printing. The Bangor Daily News, the state's only remaining privately held daily, also supplements its business sources of revenue with charitable donations. For several years now, the BDN has successfully made a strong case for the need for contributions from readers over and above subscription fees. Last November, the BDN announced the formation of the Maine Independent News Collaborative, along with pilot members, the Lincoln County News, the Penobscot Bay Press, Amjambo Africa, and the Quoddy Tides. Their goal is to share resources and work together on reporting projects. The Mid-Coast Villager is also pursuing a non-traditional business model. By consolidating the papers, the publishers hope to put resources into more reporting. They also plan to buttress the newspaper with other ventures, including a cafe and events around their news reporting. They'll complement traditional newspaper ad revenue and circulation with philanthropic support from individuals and foundations. Indeed, they just last week, I was delighted to see, secured a grant from the group Press Forward, one that we also secured, so exciting for them. Initiatives like MINC, the Maine Trust, the Mid-Coast Villager, and our own Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting and Maine's traditional news outlets are all attempting to make the case that local news is a vital public good, necessary for our common benefit, and therefore worth collectively supporting. It's a case that news organizations must make. To build a constituency willing to financially support local news, we and others in Maine must first and foremost produce high quality, relevant news that has an impact and adds value to our readers' knowledge and lives. People must want our news. That's the bottom line. News organizations also no longer just deliver reporting passively, but are creating that common hearth that I mentioned, building communities for civic dialogue and civic education. In the case of the Mid-Coast Villager, quite literally by opening a cafe as a convening space for news, dialogue, and community. At the Maine Monitor, we do that by creating opportunities for our readers to engage in a deeper dialogue around our news reporting through social media engagement, but also through hosted conversations with our newsroom team, including one we just had here in Belfast a few weeks ago. Our live journalism events are also opportunities when we aim to give our readers the opportunity to hear from and ask questions of key people involved in the most pressing issues for Maine, as we did in May during a live Zoom discussion between our editor, Kate Koff, and Secretary of State, Shanna Bellows. We're also moving beyond the competitive approach to journalism to look for collaborations that better serve our readers. In addition to giving away our news for free republication at the Maine Monitor, we regularly partner with Maine news organizations on joint reporting projects, including an award-winning story we did last year with the Bangor Daily News and a recent project we just did with the Portland Press-Herald and the Pulitzer Center. A new partnership that we have with the AP is further expanding our capacity to spread our news around, as well as bring our readers AP content. Our past collaborations include partnerships with the Boston Globe, Time, ProPublica, and we are finding new ways to partner with Maine's small town and community news organizations. This includes an initiative we launched with WERU in the spring to host a monthly radio program, the Maine Monitor Radio Hour. We're also looking at opportunities to share our experience and expertise with some of these startup news organizations, providing editorial support, providing advice on fundraising, whatever we can to help them grow. You'll never get that first to break a story drive out of journalists, and we shouldn't want to. But the more that we can collaborate, find ways to share stories, resources, and maximize our reach and impact, the better for everyone. In Maine, our news reporting capacity definitely took a hit, but all of us in local news in Maine are pushing back and working to rebuild a news ecosystem that is not only sustainable, but that can grow and ensure Mainers have the news that they deserve. But as all our models of operation really make clear, news cannot be sustained if people and institutions are not willing to support it. And we are seeing evidence that people and institutions are increasingly willing to do just that. The Press Forward initiative that I mentioned earlier that just gave out grants last week is a perfect example. Press Forward is a national initiative that launched last year. It's a coalition of philanthropic foundations that have committed to investing more than $500 million to strengthen local newsrooms, close gaps in journalism coverage, advance public policy to expand access to local news, and to scale infrastructure to help the news sector thrive. The grants that Press Forward announced last week were to 205 small local news outlets, and they totaled $20 million. In addition to the Midcoast Villager and the Maine Monitor, here in Maine, the Penobscot Bay Press, Anjambo Africa, and Sunlight Media also received those grants. Advocating for and investing in local independent news is an investment that I believe can truly have an impact for our community that will last across generations. It's a tough time in journalism in the United States, but the need for journalism in the US could not be greater. I believe deeply in the power of local news, and I'm honored to be a part of the Maine Monitor and our work of delivering free, nonpartisan news to empower people across the state of Maine. I hope that I've raised some interesting issues. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this, and I really look forward to a dialogue and your questions. Right.
Well, I have a question.
There's also already 2 hands up.
What's your prognosis for the printed news?
Yeah, it's not looking good. I think, I mean, we don't print so at the Maine Monitor, but from all the conversations that I've had with news organizations here in Maine and in other parts of the country, it's print is expensive, and it's more so actually the delivery that is very expensive. And that's tough in a state like Maine, where we're very dispersed across a pretty big area. So I think, print, it's interesting though, I will say a lot of the small startups, the small town community-based startups that are happening here in Maine are doing print. They're kind of going both ways, and they're trying to find ways to reduce the costs or kind of share the costs. But I think when you talk to most people that are studying news long-term, the prognosis for print is not great, which I don't like. I love having a print. I love getting my print newspaper. And actually what I really love about it is that, I mean, like most of you, I mean, I grew up reading the print newspaper. It was there every morning at breakfast. And I have 3 kids, and I like having the newspaper around because they pick it up and they flip through and they read things they might not otherwise have read through. And you don't get that same thing when you're scrolling. It is a very different experience. So I will be one of those people that if print news goes away for good, I will be one of those people that really mourns it. I think it's just having like a library, having access to a wide variety of material that's just sitting in front of you sparks curiosity. So but I think it's a hard business model to keep going.
I worked for a local newspaper about the size of the BDN for 9 years, but that was 1,000 years ago. And I'm surprised to hear you say well, electronic journalism, is that what you practice at the Monitor?
Yeah. So we're digital only.
Yeah. How many of these other organizations that you mentioned are electronic?
Well, all news organizations have some kind of web presence now. There's really nobody that doesn't have an, and that is really where the subscription revenue for more traditional news organizations, that's where they're getting the revenue from, not from the print subscriptions, but from the online subscriptions. So most of them are really focused on trying to expand their digital presence.
So that seems to be the future of news, right? And that means that you're competing when you go online, you're competing with all other forms of things that are online for time spent online. Is that going to work?
Yeah, it's and I think that that is absolutely true. So one of the real focus of our news organization and most news organizations really is how to push it out as a digital product, how to push the digital product. So we rely on newsletters, and that is really the form that most news organizations are taking nowadays. I don't know if you subscribe to any of the Maine Trust newspapers, but they've been really putting an emphasis on newsletters in the last year since they've kind of refocused. And so what we're doing is, instead of waiting for you to stumble across us on the web, we're saying, if you like the kind of news that we do, we'll push it right to your inbox. And so we do that. We have a variety of different newsletters that are trying to meet a reader's needs. What's your interest? Do you want a daily summary of news at the end of the day? Check, we do that. Do you want news that only focuses on the climate? Check, we do that. Are you interested in a specific rural region of Maine? Again, we do that. And then we have our primary publication is the Maine Monitor, which comes out on Sunday morning. So it's really that push as opposed to waiting for you to pull from our website.
Well, I certainly wish you all the success possible.
Sure, yes. So because we have a Zoom audience, if folks could definitely use the microphone for questions, Brenda asked.
Hi, my name is Carol Herwig, and this is pretty personal for me. I spent 40 years in newspapers, and 3 of them are dead. And probably the 4th, USA Today, isn't far behind, at least in its print situation. So, having been from lead type to satellite transmission, I'm just curious as to, you're talking about, your newsletters and all that, but I didn't know about you until like a couple of weeks ago, and I've been here for 2 years, and I'm pretty avid about newspapers. So how are you getting the word out?
Yeah.
God, I wish you luck. It's really hard.
Yeah. Events like this. This is, my getting the word out is really important. We don't have, and honestly, this is the case for most news organizations now. You don't walk down the street and see the news box anymore. That's you don't walk into cafes and see a whole bunch of newspapers on the shelf. When was the last time somebody stopped at the newsstand at Hannaford on your way out? Okay, great. What, 2 people out of the room. So that's good. So they do have it on the bad place. We can talk to them about that. But it is, I think all news organizations are suffering from this. We don't have those visual cues that we always used to have. Just the news box. that was the regular thing. Walk up with your quarter. I mean, did you remember when it used to be a quarter? Gosh, I remember when the New York Times started to go up, when you still had to put more money in. Anyway, so because I was in college and that's expensive. It's hard. It's hard. Everybody has to get the word out. And so part of it is doing community engagement. Part of it is word of mouth. I mean, one of the things when people say, well, how can we support you? I say, well, tell your friends. Tell your friends, share the newsletter, forward it on. It's free. We don't care. So getting the word out is really important. As much as we can, trying to build awareness that we're out there. We are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. Yeah. So there we go. So this is, yeah. Brenda now. Librarians are supposed to, though. So, we've been doing this for 15 years. And I think, for a long time, the fact that we were built on a model of produce news, give it away for free. We didn't publish as our own publication. So our stuff, you've probably read our reporting. You may not realize it, but you've probably read our reporting. So, last year, our news was republished 550 times. So, most people don't stop and read the byline to see that it said by Rose Lundy, the Maine Monitor. They just hop into the story, which is great. We want you to get the news, but then that also means you didn't register. I mean, I've had people say to me, oh, did you see that really great report in the Portland Press Herald about X, Y, and Z? And I say, I did, because it's ours. So that's a challenge for us, but we're not going to change that. I mean, people have said to me, well, why do you do that? Why do you give your news away for free republication? You're giving away your brand, you're giving away your content. Why do you do that? And I say, because we were founded with the goal of trying to lift up the Maine news ecosystem. So it wasn't just about writing stories. It was about trying to save the Maine news ecosystem and give free content to try and keep our newspapers healthy, our news organizations, not just newspapers, TV, radio, all of it. But that's a real founding principle of our organization. And, when we've done strategic reviews, we thought, okay, should we push ourselves and challenge ourselves on that? And every time we do, we say, no, that's who we are. We are about giving it away for free. And so, yeah, it causes some brand confusion, but for us, it's worth it. But I do think that, just capturing people's attention is a challenge for everyone, for sure. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for your information. And I have a question that has 3 parts, but they're all kind of related. And so the first part, it would be presumably where you worked, your 7 stations overseas, they're going through similar problems, some of them, depending on the politics. Some places there's state media where they get the money from the state, so it's probably no big issue, but then you don't get what people may want. But maybe you could talk a little bit about any of your experience in terms of what their experiences are and how they're responding. Second part of the question has to do with education. And one is, and we have somebody from the senior college here, so it has education. One is, what are the responses in the schools of journalism to what's going on? They still exist, as far as I know, departments of journalistic studies and journalism in universities and colleges, but I'm wondering what the take on that is. And finally, in terms of, I mean, you see here, people are all looking and saying, gee, I never heard of this, I never heard of that. Get into the schools. Get into the schools and get the kids aware of this great change in local reporting and in news in general, and that they can be a part of understanding the need to move to new models and at least be aware of it. So those are my 3 questions. Maybe you could let us know a little. Thank you.
Yeah, let me take the second 2 first, and then I can talk about the third. Yeah, so completely agree with you. And last week it's just last week. No, 2 weeks ago. It's been a busy month. 2 weeks ago, we brought a film called Strip for Parts to Maine, and we did 3 showings around the state, and we brought the filmmaker Rick Goldsmith with us. We brought him to Maine, and we did Q&A at the end of his show. And the documentary is about, and we can talk about this if you're interested, it's fascinating. The film's great. I recommend it. Many people have said, why didn't you bring it to the Colonial? So if you're going to ask me that, I've already been asked. I know, only had so many days that I could bring it. But it's about venture capital investment in local news and how it's actually one of the primary causes of the deterioration of local news in the United States. But back to your question. So we brought Strip for Parts and Rick Goldsmith. And when I was putting together the program, I reached out to colleges, I reached out to high schools, and I reached out to middle schools. And we got positive responses from all. So actually, Rick stayed with us here in Belfast. And so we brought him over to Belfast Area High School to their journalism group. And we brought him over to Troy Howard Middle School and to Corner Spring, their middle school program. Troy Howard, I don't know if you know, but they have a student-generated newspaper. So students initiated doing a newspaper at Troy Howard. It was really inspiring and really exciting. We also brought him up to Bangor High School, and he spoke to a room of about 100 students, all of whom were completely interested and asked amazing questions. But in each of the student engagements, it was just really inspiring. They were very focused on it. They asked really good questions about news, about news literacy, how to distinguish, like how should they be thinking about news, how should they be engaged to save news. So they already got it. Then we did a program down at UNE. There is a lot of interest in journalism, and it's not dead. There are definitely future journalists out there. Including some very impressive ones at Troy Howard. But there are the journalism schools are still active, all the ones that you know of, Columbia, Arizona State, all of the famous ones. But what's really interesting is there are initiatives to try and push to give college students at the undergraduate level much more of a practical experience of journalism to really inspire them to pursue careers in journalism. So there's a program out of the University of Vermont that's called the Center for Community News. And they have a grant, they have grant money to work with academics in universities around the country to create fellowships for students to be basically placed in news organizations. So we have one who's from UNE. UNE is the partner with UVM here in Maine, although I think they're trying to expand it. But it's a really great program to connect young people with getting them just in the newsroom. When I was in college, I had a lot of different ideas, as one does, but one of my ideas was I was really passionate about journalism. So for a while I wanted to go into journalism, and I worked for my school paper. And then in the summer, I worked for the Cape Cod Times. I grew up on Cape Cod, and I had real newsroom experience, which really was just a formative experience in terms of who I am, how I write, how I research, how I talk to people. It's just a very interesting experience. But I worked for them for 2 years, every summer, every winter break. And I loved being in a newsroom. And so to get students to have, we don't have a newsroom per se. We do have an office at the press suite at the State House, and so we do work out of that. But just giving them that access really inspires them. The other thing I'll say about that is everyone is aware that we have to cultivate that next generation of journalists, and that includes funders. There's a lot of foundations that are putting money into creating those programs. For example, the last 2 summers, we've had a student come to us from Columbia Journalism School, fully funded by a grant through the Knight Foundation. So that makes it easy for us because we're a nonprofit, every penny counts. So if they're going to pay for somebody for the entire summer, absolutely, we're going to not only get a top quality journalist, but then, that's already paid for. There's the Scripps Howard Foundation is doing the same thing. We have last 2 years, we've had a postgraduate fellow funded in part by the Scripps Howard Foundation. Report for America. Have you guys heard about Report for America? So this is another effort to try and cultivate and make it possible to employ that next generation. I think that make it possible to employ is the key thing. So Report for America was founded, I should know this, but maybe 7, 8 years ago, with the idea of specifically this. How do we make sure young journalists have the opportunity to work in a newsroom? Because newsrooms are dying. They can't afford even the people that they do have. How are they going to hire interns or young journalists? So Report for America was founded, and they marry newsrooms. So newsrooms apply and get selected, and people that are interested in being journalists apply and get selected, and then you kind of are married up. And Report for America helps fund the position over the course of the 3-year fellowship on a decreasing level. We've benefited hugely from that program. We have had 5, but 2 of them didn't finish their program. So we've had 3 Report for America fellows who all finished their program, and we've kept them. So one of them just left us this past year, Samantha Hogan. Some of you may know her name. She was Journalist of the Year 3 years ago. Did amazing reporting on Maine's lack of a public defender system. She just left us to go down to Atlanta. She doesn't like winter, so we couldn't keep her forever. But Kate Koff, our editor, and Rose Lundy were both Report for America fellows, and they remain with us. So there are opportunities trying to cultivate that next generation of journalists. To your other question about sort of media in other countries, most of my foreign service career was in the Middle East and in Southeast Europe. So I started in Nepal, I was in Tunisia, Egypt, Iraq, Jerusalem, Croatia, North Macedonia. I feel like I missed something in there, but anyway. And each one was different. Depended on the country. I mean, I was in Tunisia in the time of Ben Ali, so that was a dictator. I was in Egypt during Hosni Mubarak. I did a lot of work with news organizations in Egypt, and there were independent newspapers that were trying to, to do real news, but it was tough. When I was in North Macedonia, when I arrived, it was governed by a dictator, and he had already really decimated the news organizations. But there were some that were still pushing back. When I was in Iraq, it was kind of, I was there in 2004, and one of my big jobs was to try and work with Iraqis who wanted to rebuild news organizations in Iraq after Saddam Hussein. They had, no experience of being independent, impartial journalists. So a lot of my work was helping them understand how to do news, how to do journalism, and it was a little strange because we, of course, were the object of their questions. So it was a little strange to sort of prep them to grill my own people. Whereas, normally my job was to prep my own people to be grilled by the media. So it was a little bit of a strange situation, but really inspiring to see their commitment and effort. So. Yeah.
Yes. Like this lady behind me, 40 years in television news, and I'm uplifted by your comments of that young people are interested in journalism. We've got to further that. I am discouraged by the other numbers and what's happening. But my real issue is I'm delighted to hear that you are collaborating with various news organizations. Just a thought would be how to get your name, how to get that monitor out where everybody automatically knows what it is, knows that it's solid and credible. Perhaps having a collaboration with a couple of television stations, one in Portland, one in Bangor, and let them do the promotion of here's Mary Jane and here's Ralph, and together they've worked on this story.
Yeah.
And let them do promotion. Try to hit in every way you can that this has been around, and for those who are, and there are some who are losing faith in journalism and believing it, and that scares me. So the credibility you have, you just got to go out there and flaunt it.
Yeah. That's what I say too. I totally agree with you. Yeah, it's a great idea. And we actually are, we've been, had outreach from news or television organizations here in Maine, about getting our folks on their programs. You know, we've had our reporters on Maine Calling periodically. We have a good relationship with them. We're actually talking with a TV station, sort of in the Portland area, about having more of a regular presence, sort of not quite as similar as what we have with WERU, because that's a whole hour program, but more a regular appearance. We are trying to, I mean, we're trying to get out, you know, you can't just rely on, I mean, back to your question, we can't just rely on people stumbling across us on the internet. We have to get our news out there. And it's not just about getting our name known, it is also getting people to be aware of the news. I mean, the things that the journalists are reporting on are really important issues for Maine. You know, I mentioned Samantha and the public defense issue. You know, before Samantha was doing that reporting, nobody was really paying attention to the fact that Maine didn't have a public defender system, and that, you know, people were being represented by, you know, not sometimes very good people, but sometimes not very good people. You know, Rose's reporting this last year, you know, about some of the gaps that exist between nursing homes and assisted living facilities and the lack of oversight because of that gap. I mean, that's really important. Maine is the oldest state in the country. I mean, how we care for our older Mainers is really important. So we want people to know our news, not just our name. I will say, back to that collaboration that I talked about, you know, news organizations it really is astonishing how much that's changed. I mean, that in and of itself, I think, is the biggest change in news in the last 20 years, is that news organizations see a common threat, the common threat being demise. And so there is just much more of a collaborative outlook. If we can all work together and lift each other up, it's for all of our benefit. So news organizations, you know, TV news is not shy about saying, you know, yeah, let's promote that Maine Monitor story. You know, our readers need to hear about it. It's good content for our viewers. That it gets the Maine Monitor some attention, great, that's extra benefit. You know, the Bangor Daily News, we have a great relationship with them, to the point that this summer, when we were doing our summer fundraising drive, they said, well, you know, do you want to have a pop-up when we put your stories on our website? Do you want to have a pop-up that says you're in the midst of your fundraising? And I said, yes, please, that would be great. Which, you know, that they don't have to do that. That's amazing. Like, they were like, well, you give us the news for free. Let's see what we can do to help you raise some money. So it is, it's just that collaboration is really a very positive thing. We're all looking at ways to help each other. Yeah, so for the benefit, because I know Brenda's thinking there's no microphone. The question was, do we have full-time reporters or contractors? So we have full-time reporters. Our newsroom right now is 8. Our editor, deputy editor, we have a multimedia editor, and 5 full-time reporters. We also have regular contributors who are on freelance contracts, so they're not salaried reporters, but we have them on a regular contract. Generally. So we do both.
Hello. I'm checking, is that owl working? Is that an owl up there?
No, I don't.
Up for Zoom? No? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I have a voice for radio. Couple of things. So I went to a concert in Boston early this summer, and I was standing just watching everybody pour through the doors of this 5,000 person hall, and they only had one entrance. And all of a sudden it just hit me that I did not see one paper ticket. And they were all, this room would have been the demographic. It wasn't a bunch of young people. So print, great, if you can find it. I was in a Pittsburgh airport recently, no newspapers. I said, you have newspapers? They said, no, nobody buys them. Okay. Couple of things again. Whenever the Waldo Independent got started, I was friends with the people who started it, and I became a columnist for them. They said, well, write one and see if, if you can write a second one. I ended up writing 13 years of political and local observation. Then I got out of that and got into local politics. I was I ran for mayor. I became mayor. We almost on the first day I got served, Walmart wanted to come to Belfast. And for the next 6 years, we were used to having 3 or 4 reporters, 2 or 3 television stations, radio, all there in city council. I got off the city council last year. I think we saw a reporter once in the last couple of years before I got off. We added television and we added internet access by agenda item. So the reporters learned, why do I go to a meeting? And so they stay home and they watch it, or they go back and watch it later and they click on issues. But Midcoast Villager, I'm a subscriber. I wish them well, but I know what they're going to do to Belfast, and they're already doing it. I just looked it up. We have a city council election in Belfast in 2 weeks. Do you think they've reported on the 6 candidates? No, they have not. And anyway, so to the question, I don't care about, I'm well served by statewide media, including Maine Wire, not Maine Monitor, which I mistook for the Maine Wire today. I'm like, who are these people? Anyway, check out the Maine Wire if you'd like to see the mirror. Anyway, what can we do in Belfast? I don't care about the state, but we need local coverage. We need local reporting, and we are lost without it. It's really a tragedy for Belfast.
So the Midcoast Villager did report on the Belfast City Council forum that we had here. So they did report on that, and they have been doing candidate profiles. You know, they're trying to rebuild, and I know that they are well aware of the fact that they need to be devoting attention and time to Belfast and to Waldo County. I know that's a priority for them. I think, you know, they want to add reporters. They are maintaining a bureau here in Belfast. I think they, you know, I don't want to speak for them. I'm not from the Midcoast Villager, so apologies to anybody from the Midcoast Villager that's watching. You should come and if I get anything wrong, we can correct the record. But I do know that they are committed to expanding their news coverage at a local level. You know, I've talked to the publisher. You know, it's a real priority for them. I think eventually they'd like to see a bigger presence here. This giant grant that they just got from Press Forward, hopefully that's going to result in some new hires. Maybe we'll start seeing some new faces. So I think that's their goal. You know, they are very, you know, local news. I think all of the local news organizations suffer from, they've had to cut positions because revenue has declined. And like I said, they're all trying different models. You know, the Penobscot Bay Press also got a Press Forward grant. And I think, you know, they hope that will help them add people to their staff. The thing that you can do is, yeah, don't drop your subscription, for sure. Don't drop your subscription. And, you know, to the extent that you can afford it, give them a donation. You know, they can't regrow and add positions if they don't have the funding. And, you know, we're actually looking at ways that we can do collaborations where we can put in for grants that both allow us to do statewide reporting, but then to collaborate with local newsrooms so that we can help secure funding so that they can do better, more local reporting. And back to that collaboration, like I don't want to see our local news organizations die. That's not our intent. It's a challenge though. So don't give up on your local news organizations. Definitely, you know, give them the support they need to try and do what they want to see done, which is give you robust local reporting, for sure.
Oh, hi. My question is, do you see in the near past more groups trying to, I'll say, dissuade people from thinking that your information is accurate?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. Yeah. So the last 2 years, we've had a booth at the Common Ground Fair. And I love doing the Common Ground Fair, not only because it's just super fun, but it's also a great opportunity to talk to just a really wide variety of people, some of whom are our readers, some of whom have never heard of us, back to the how do you get the word out. And one of the big questions we always get is, well, how do I know you're really nonpartisan? How do I know that you're really reporting facts? You know, I tell them, go on our website. Like, it's all there. You want to know anything about us, it's there. We don't hide anything. And we also tell you how we do the reporting. So one of the things that our reporters will often do, particularly for these big news pieces that are really chock full of facts and figures, is do a parallel report. How did we do that? How did I get that story for you, or what's it based on? They'll do, and you'll see this not just on our news organization. This is very common now. Back to that, how do you build trust? Is giving people that behind the scenes. How did I get the story? I mean, the New York Times now does it as a video. If you go on their website, there's like little videos that their reporters will do. It says like, how did I get the story? This is what I did. But giving people the confidence in the, and a lot of the Maine Monitor radio hour actually is about that. So we'll talk a bit about the news, but then a lot of it is spent talking about, well, how did you get that? It's sort of peeling back the layers, lifting the curtain of the process. And that lifting the curtain of the process is part of trying to get people to trust the news, and trust that the information in it is factual. You know, we have the luxury of being digital only, so that allows us to hold news stories until they're fully baked. It also allows us to give the news story the space it needs to tell the story. So, you know, Kate will tell me pretty frequently, no, I held that story because I really wanted them to go back and talk to more folks about that, or to go back and look at the data on that. We try very hard. We are very, you know, our nonpartisan label is very important to us. And so making sure that we get all sides of the story is critical. Sure.
You'll have to fight. I'm sorry.
I can stay behind too.
Thank you very much, Mika, for the talk. I feel like it's been really interesting. And maybe from some of your experience, you can touch on this, but I was kind of curious. We talked about a lot of different formats of kind of how we get the news out there to folks, from social media to print to video to podcasts and all that. And I'm just curious, like, what do you see in the future? Like, are there even other ways that, you know, maybe we're not thinking of today, or would love to kind of hear what you think in terms of some of those different formats, and if there's something out there that, you know, maybe we don't see a lot today that you think could be bigger in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, news organizations, there's a lot of, they're trying all sorts of different things. And in different communities, different platforms work. Like there are some news organizations are even using WhatsApp. We aren't using that here in Maine, but it's not really our audience. But there are some, particularly in urban areas, where WhatsApp is a really big feature. And, you know, what is the next format? I don't know. We're always trying to think. I mean, I think what's interesting is how much journalists have had to adapt. You know, I mean, when I was working at the Cape Cod Times, like I could go do my reporting, come back in, type my story up on my old green and black screen and, you know, file it. And that was it. I didn't have to do anything else. But we expect our reporters now to not only research, write, file the story, but to also, you know, help us think up what's the social media info that we're putting out there, do a video about it to promote their own story, do their own social media posts to promote their own story, use all these different things. Also to do public speaking. I mean, that's a big part, and to be able to do radio, TV, and print. So we're expecting our journalists to basically do everything, whereas you used to be able to specialize, right? For the people that are in journalism here, you could specialize. But now you have to be able to do it all. You know, I mean, who thought that the New York Times was going to, I mean, I know I keep using the New York Times as an example, but like who thought the New York Times was going to be doing videos? Right, that's like, you can't go on their website now without seeing 5 different videos. It is just a different era. And so whatever the next thing is, we're going to add that to the journalist's plate of, okay, now you have to master this. So yeah, it's definitely a different world for journalists.
I think we had a tie for our last question.
It seems like this is depending on philanthropy. How steady are philanthropic streams? Are they given to fads, or how does that work?
Yeah, being a nonprofit manager is a scary thing. So there are models like ours, which are really wholly wholly dependent on philanthropic giving. And then there are other, like all the other models I talked about, it's some combination. And even we are starting to try and look at how do we diversify, not to start doing commercial things, but to how do we think about different revenue streams? Because having just grants and individual giving is, that's three legs, right? There are other nonprofits. I mean, the lion of nonprofit news is the Texas Tribune, and they have done this amazing job of building an events income revenue stream. And some of that is they do a big annual conference and they sell tickets for that, but most of it is actually corporate sponsorship for their events. So that's an interesting model that a lot of other newsrooms are trying to also look at. I mean, for example, for the Strip for Parts showing that I mentioned, we had corporate sponsors, we had partners, media sponsors for that. So that was good. It didn't earn us extra revenue, but it helped cover some of the costs. But those are things that people are looking at. I mean, in terms of philanthropic support and how steady that is, I mean, we'll see over the long term. I think this is still for the news industry, philanthropic support is still a pretty new thing. And it is growing. There is the Press Forward is the prime example, but that's not the only foundation that has moved into supporting journalism. More and more foundations. We had a foundation last year that came to us for the first time and said, "We've never funded news. We like what you do. We'd like to try this out." And they renewed this year for a much larger amount. I spent a lot of time talking with them throughout the year about what we were doing, why it was important, and making sure that they felt comfortable with that there was value in what they were doing. And there's a lot of folks that see journalism as critical for democracy and our society, but also folks that see journalism as critical for the issues they care about. If you care about healthcare or the environment or education or civil rights, if nobody is getting news about any of those issues, nobody's going to care about your issues. Journalists aren't advocates. That's not what we do. But we do a critical part of advocacy, which is information and education. And the foundations that care about those other things are seeing that they have to support news organizations to keep reporting on these issues. Otherwise, nobody's going to know about them and nobody's going to care. We've seen, a large growth in philanthropic support for our work over the last few years. We're really grateful for that, both from individuals as well as foundations. It's allowing us to add more folks to our newsroom, do more with our news. So I'm hopeful that will continue, but I'm also super conscious of not, getting out over the tip of my, what's the phrase? My thank you, skis. I was thinking surfboard. I don't know why I'm a skier too. Why would I not think of skis? Surfboard. I don't know. I'm not a surfer. Where that came from, I don't know. But it's, I think that's, like any organization or business or even nonprofit, you're constantly thinking about planning for the future. We're raising money as we're spending it. So it's not, we don't have an endowment. We're slowly trying to build up at least some kind of a few months of security, but that's tough. We're raising money as we're spending it. So it is a challenge.
Well, let's give her a big hand. Mika, thank you so much. I came in discouraged, and all I can say is I'm a little less discouraged. And I can't wait to start getting my Maine Monitor. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, Brenda. And this is being recorded. I don't know if you share the recording. Oh, okay. Oh, it'll be on the library YouTube channel, of course. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that